Heya Cryptozens, it's 10 p.m. Pacific time. My name is Nikodemus, and welcome back to the Crypto Overnighter, where we take a nightly look at the crypto, NFT, and metaverse space. And keep in mind, nothing in this show should ever be considered financial advice. It's 10 p.m. Pacific time, December 1st, 2022. Let's begin. As I said earlier on Twitter today, tonight's podcast will have stories about countries. Stories about commissions and commissioners. We'll have stories about crime, but we won't be covering the criminal's words. He's got enough exposure today. And Twitter is always a good place to find me. Link is in the show notes. But my goodness, we have got to talk about New York. The New York Department of Financial Services put out their proposal for new regulation. And this would let the agency bill New York regulated crypto companies for being supervised by them. Now, it was just like 8 months ago that the New York Senate first set it up so that the department could charge the firms that they regulate. And to be fair, this only affects companies with a BIT license. Now, the requirements to get that license are so high, only 22 companies have ever gotten one. And more than that, it's how that it works with TradFi and the banks. The companies pay the bills for the regulators. That's why Ross and Benham, and we're going to get to him later. But that's why Benham wants crypto brought under the Commodities Future Trading Commission. It's for those regulatory fees and the additional hiring authority. So if something like DCCPA is passed, spot markets would fall under the CFTC, and they would begin collecting fees. Anytime a government agency can increase either their budget or their employee count, they do so. That's what determines status between government agencies. Adrienne Harris is the agency's superintendent, and she put out a press release that said monies collected would let the agency boost its crypto team. Now that, of course, would, quote, help the department continue protecting consumers and ensuring the safety and soundness of this agency. And so what all this means is that the proposal starts a 10-day comment period, and then a 60-day comment period after the draft is posted in the state register. When that 60 days is up, they will publish either a revised proposal or news that the regulation was adopted in its current form. And now Canada. Miners like Canada. And by that I mean crypto miners. And why not? They've got beautiful landscapes, cheap electricity, and poutine. What's not to like? And Manitoba even more so, at least on the electricity front. Manitoba has the second cheapest rates in the country after Quebec. Unfortunately, for prospective crypto mining firms, there's bad news for any crypto mining that wants to set up shop in Manitoba. You're too late, at least for the next 18 months or so, because Manitoba instituted an 18-month moratorium on new crypto mining projects. Their concern is that crypto miners are going to find out about all that cheap electricity and all that poutine and flock to Manitoba. They were concerned that that could overwhelm their local power grid. Now remember, the other day we reported that New York's Governor Kathy Hochul, she signed a 2-year ban on new proof-of-work mining operations. Even in Texas, with its wide open land and its low electricity rates, they have slowed down the permits for new miners to hook into the network. Cameron Friesen is their finance minister. He is also responsible for their Manitoba hydro utility. And he says that you can't just tell people we're going to build new dams. What that means is there is a shuttering of the grid for new operations for the next 18 months. That said, the 37 existing miners are unaffected by the moratorium. 17 miners have asked to join the grid. Their combined demand would be roughly half the power generation of their new Kiosk generation system. And as it stands, it was projects like Kiosk and Bipole 3 that has put Manitoba Hydro in debt. Right now, about 40% of their user fees go towards servicing that debt. Now, speaking of projects, we got Sber. They're Russia's largest bank and largest lender. Used to go by the name Sberbank. Used to be that they weren't tied into the Ethereum blockchain either, but here we are. Because yesterday, Sber put out a call to action, advertising their platform's new capabilities, including smart contracts and apps on the Ethereum network. What this means is that developers can move back and forth between Sber's proprietary blockchain and public networks like Ethereum. Part of this innovation came about by integrating with MetaMask. So Sber interacts with MetaMask, and then MetaMask interacts with Ethereum. Alexander Nam is one of the guys working on the project. He said, quote, Sber Blockchain Lab works closely with external developers and partner companies, and I am glad that our community will be able to run DeFi applications on Sber's infrastructure. He also said that this feature would help Sber unite with developers, corporations, and institutions, allowing them to work together to find practical business applications of the blockchain. Which is interesting timing. It wasn't all that long, and we covered it. Russian lawmakers were in discussions to amend the laws to allow for a national crypto exchange. Amazingly, this effort is supported by both the Ministry of Finance, which is relatively crypto-friendly, and the Bank of Russia, which is the central bank, so it sucks. In this case, it sucks and it hates crypto. So to see that bit of cooperation between the two organizations was a little surprising. I wonder how much of that has to do with Putin and his call for an open blockchain settlement network. Now that his nation is under sanctions for aggression against Ukraine, it's not surprising that he sees the current situation as unfair. Now, recently, he criticized what he sees as a monopoly when it comes to global settlements, and he feels like the West is picking on him. Now, the fact is, each nation is free to choose to sanction Russia or not. Not all nations have done so. And the fact is that most of the financial world has chosen to align itself against Putin. But that's not monopolistic. That's normal. As it currently stands, Russian citizens cannot use crypto for payments. That ban went into effect in 2020. CFTC Chair Rostin Benham. I told you we'd get to this guy. Well, he went to the Senate Ag Committee to talk about FTX, and he set the tone from the beginning in his opening remarks. Quote, "Invariably, the questions we are all obligated to answer as regulators are, how did you let this happen? And how will you prevent this from happening again? Without new authority for the CFTC, there will remain gaps in a federal regulatory framework, even if other regulators act within their existing authority." Now, at one point, Senator Tina Smith said that what happened at FTX was, quote, "shocking, not surprising." She also said that these are the kinds of problems that are going to keep happening unless or until those gaps that he was talking about are taken care of. And for his part, Benham said that his agency's rules contain, quote, "core elements that have served the market for decades." He also said, quote, "We know how to do this because, as he points out, the Securities Exchange Commission has the authority to force basic safeguards on the organizations that they regulate. Some of those safeguards are things like the separation of company money and customer money. This is not virgin territory for the U.S. government, and it fits within Benham's agenda of late. He has been pushing for greater regulatory authority for the CFTC for months, and while there's been talk about a power struggle between the SEC and the CFTC, he said that interagency cooperation between the two agencies is nothing new. In fact, he said that he figures the responsibilities between the two agencies would end up being pretty much the same. And he took the opportunity to talk about one of the things that he feels was a success, one of the few to be found in the whole FTX fiasco. LedgerX, the derivatives wing of the FTX empire. As a derivatives platform, they fall under the purview of the CFTC. And Benham called that a successful example of how to regulate. But that's only because the CFTC was regulating them. As Benham said, quote, "We at the CFTC do not have the legal authority to ask about an unregulated entity. We simply do not have the authority to register cash market exchanges. This is the gap." Now, those cash market exchanges, as he calls it, those are spot markets that we're talking about. Now, he sees them as falling in a regulatory gap that because nobody has clear, direct authority over spot exchanges. That is, if the tokens exchanged are not securities. The closest we really get is the work done by the CFTC on the derivatives market and the work that the SEC has done ferreting out securities. Senator Kristen Gillibrand had some questions for Benham. She is the co-sponsor of a bill called the Responsible Financial Innovation Act. Her co-sponsor on that is Senator Cynthia Lummis. And Gillibrand has some concerns. She told Benham that there were a couple of risk elements ahead. Mergers and acquisitions, at which point Benham had to admit that the paperwork for FTX to acquire LedgerX was a notice filing at best. Another concern that she had on that was the interaction between the United States and offshore companies, as well as United States companies operating outside of the country, which is relevant because it didn't seem like some of the participants were too interested in the distinction between FTX US and FTX.com. So it's Benham's position that the Digital Commodities Consumer Protection Act would have prevented this. Now, it is certainly true that the DCCPA does ban the intermingling of company money and customer money. And it's also true that the DCCPA would have required better governance and better bookkeeping. In fact, he suggests taking another look at the bill to see if it addresses other possible issues. He said, quote, "Given the circumstances of the past few weeks, I think we should take a pause and look at the bill and make sure there are no gaps or holes. Where the bill may be strengthened is disclosures around financial information of the entity, the crypto entity, and conflicts of interest. Obviously, an issue that many members have talked about today, given the brazen conflicts that occurred at the non-regulated entity." And he is just not happy with the fact that most of the enforcement actions that the CFC takes is initiated in response to tips and whistleblowers. He said it's not healthy. He said that it is his agency's job to spot those problems for themselves. Now, one of Chair Benham's compatriots also made crypto news. Commissioner Johnson wants her agency to take steps to safeguard customer assets. This is as the CFTC levies sanctions against one Jeremy Spence. Now, Spence was known online as CoinSignals, and it was using that name that he defrauded investors out of $5 million. Now, he was hit with a 42-month prison sentence. And with that as the backdrop, Johnson suggests that the agency should be using their existing powers to tighten up the requirements on keeping customer funds safe. Johnson said that they should make use of the authority that they already have to mitigate risks to customer assets. She characterized her statement as a call to action in preventing digital asset fraud. She said, quote, "Liquidity crisis and a lack of responsible governance at cryptocurrency exchanges and other prominent crypto intermediaries have roiled the digital asset ecosystem. A series of bankruptcy filings reveals a grim portrait of some of the most egregious corporate governance and risk management failures in recent financial markets history." And, like Gillibrand, Johnson sees trouble ahead when it comes to mergers and acquisitions. She said, quote, "As we unravel the tangled web of interconnected financial transactions and relationships among cryptocurrency trading platforms facing liquidity crisis, we should anticipate a season of mergers, acquisitions, and consolidation." Now, don't go thinking that the CFTC was the only government agency with something to say on FTX. Not by a long shot. Enter Wally Adeyemo. He is the Deputy Secretary of the Treasury, and like many, it's his position that regulation is needed to protect customers and investors alike, as well as ensure financial stability throughout. Now, he was talking about FTX's implosion when he said that this shows the need to work with other countries to form international crypto regulations. This is not a new sentiment. On both sides of the Atlantic, it was made clear how the current regime of regulation just isn't working. Unless you're going to monitor and control your citizens' access to the internet, like China has, there's not much you can do to prevent your people from buying crypto. Now, we were just talking about reverse solicitation recently. MiCA's laws wouldn't have prevented EU citizens from being burned by FTX because EU citizens are free to shop all over the globe for crypto. And so lawmakers and policy analysts alike are looking for a solution to the cross-border problem. And Secretary Adeyemo said that this was needed to protect investors and consumers, but also to prevent crypto from being used for illicit purposes. He said, quote, "Crypto is a global phenomenon. And what that means is that we're going to have to work closely with our international partners to design a regulatory regime and a framework that helps us to make sure that we protect the global economy as we think about innovation like cryptocurrency." And that's going to do it for us tonight. I want to thank you, my listeners, because when you stop listening, I will stop talking. We'll see you tomorrow night.